how we can, in some small way, honor the breadth of Tip O'Neill's impact on our entire country by recognizing the place that he loved the most. We are here to discuss H.R. 4400, a bill I introduced to name the Salt Pond Visitor Center at Cape Cod National Seashore as the Tip O'Neill, Thomas P. O'Neill, Jr. Salt Pond Visitor Center. I am proud to be joined on the bill by the entire Massachusetts delegation in the House of Representatives, who are all original co-sponsors of this legislation, along with Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, who has been the greatest Speaker of the House since Tip O'Neill. Senator John Kerry has introduced companion legislation in the Senate. Many of us here who served with Tip remember his warmth, his magnetic personality, and his unyielding support for working families and the middle class. When I was elected to the House of Representatives 36 years ago, the very first vote I cast was the vote to elect Tip O'Neill Speaker of the House in 1977. That's the first vote of my career, and the best vote of my career. I had the honor of serving with Tip for 10 years, his entire tenure as Speaker, which was the longest continuous term of any Speaker since the first Congress met in 1789. He served the public for 50 years, including 34 years as a member of Congress, a public service powerhouse at the state, the federal, and the international level of American politics. He embodied the values we strive for as servants of the people's business. As an Irish Catholic politician from Boston, I am proud of Tip's successful international negotiations that helped pave the way for peace in Northern Ireland. As an American, I feel privileged to have served with such an historic guardian of America's neediest families. And as a citizen of Massachusetts, I am pleased to introduce this bill to forever recognize a great defender of the natural beauty of Cape Cod. Tip may have spent long days and weeks leading the House of Representatives, but there was no place more representative of the man and of Tip's dedication to his family as in his house on the Cape. That is where he could retreat with his partner in life, his dear Millie, and their 5 children and their 8 grandchildren. Joining us at this hearing today is Lee O'Neill, Tip's granddaughter, and she is testifying on behalf of the entire family. Thank you for joining us today, Lee. And sitting behind Lee is Thomas P. O'Neill III, Tip's son. And Tommy and I were elected 40 years ago this year as freshman state representatives in the state of Massachusetts. And through the two who are sitting here, there is a direct genetic connection, transmitting the political views and values of that great family. And it's a great honor to have the two of you here today. The squawking of politicians in Washington may have been Tip's weekday passion, but the squawking of birds on the Cape is what brought him weekend peace. The Cape Cod National Seashore is an earthly haven for countless birds, seals, and other wildlife. For Tip, it was heaven on earth where he could count his blessings every day. Even the unique geography of the Cape is reminiscent of the Tip we all knew, its sweeping arm reminding us of Tip's outstretched hand greeting everyone that he met. This year, on December 9th, Tip would be celebrating his 100th birthday. We all know where Tip would be spending it, on the shores of the Cape, in the shore company of his family at peace and smiling. I thank the committee for holding this hearing. I thank Lee for her loving embrace of her grandfather's legacy. And I thank Tip O'Neill, my mentor and my friend, for all that he did to improve the lives of millions of Americans, including my own. And I would also note that Rosemary O'Neill and Catelyn O'Neill are also here today, and I welcome them to this hearing as well, representing the family, and it's just a beautiful day to kind kind of reunite Mo Udall and Tip O'Neill here in the Udall room. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to make that opening statement.
Yes, thank you, Representative Markey. I appreciate that. With that, I will certainly introduce our second panel. We'll start with Mike Poole, who is the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Land Management with the U.S. Department of the Interior. He will be testifying today on H.R. 3365 and S-270. Victor Knox is the Associate Director for Park Planning, Facilities, and Lands with the National Park Service with the U.S. Department of the Interior. He will be testifying on H.R. 1103, H.R. 3100, H.R. 4400. Pamela Watson-Bain is the third member of our second panel. She is the Chairman of the Los Compadres de San Antonio Missions, testifying on H.R. 3100. And Lee O'Neill, of course, rounds out our panel. She is representing the O'Neill family, testifying on H.R. 4400. Welcome to everyone on our panel. And with that, we will start testimony on H.R. 4400, and we will begin with Mr. Knox.
To present the Department of Interior's views on H.R. 4400. I'd like to submit our full statement on this bill for the record and summarize the department's position. The department supports enactment of H.R. 4400, which would recognize the contributions of former Speaker Tip O'Neill that he made toward the protection of Cape Cod National Seashore by designating the Salt Pond Visitor Center at the seashore as the Thomas P. O'Neill Jr. Salt Pond Visitor Center. In 1958, Representative O'Neill became one of the first members of Congress to support protection of lands on Cape Cod as a national seashore through the introduction of legislation establishing a 40-mile-long national park area to ensure that Americans would have the ability to enjoy the marshes, ponds, wildlife, and the pristine sandy beaches of Cape Cod. Representative O'Neill continued these efforts by co-sponsoring additional bills, testifying at hearings, and advocating for the support of the legislation that led to the authorization of Cape Cod National Seashore in 1961. The seashore was formally established in 1966, and Tip O'Neill attended the May 30th, 1966 dedication of the Salt Pond Visitor Center. He was a frequent visitor, as Congressman Markey just said very eloquently. He was a frequent visitor to the National Seashore during his tenure in Congress and during his retirement years, and he remained a strong advocate for the protection of this special place. Madam Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. And with that, we will move to Ms. O'Neill for her testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Markey and Ranking Member Grijalva, thank you very much. Mr. Kildee as well. I know you served with my grandfather. And Congresswoman Tsongas, I see you here too. Hello, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of House Resolution 4400, a bill to designate the Salt Pond Visitor Center at Cape Cod National Seashore as the Thomas P. O'Neill Jr. Salt Pond Visitor Center. My name is Lee O'Neill, and as one of the 8 grandchildren of Tip and Millie O'Neill, I have been asked by my father, Tom, my uncle Kip, my aunts Susan and Rosemary to represent the O'Neill family here today. We are grateful to you, Chairman Bishop, for including this bill in today's hearing. We would also like to extend a special thanks to Ranking Member Ed Markey for his leadership in introducing H.R. 4400, again to Congresswoman Tsongas, who also sits on this committee, and to each of the members of the Massachusetts delegation, as well as Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, all of whom have sponsored this bill. On December 9th of this year, my grandfather would have celebrated his 100th birthday. We are delighted that his colleagues are commemorating his centennial year by honoring him at the Cape Cod National Seashore. Dedicating the Visitor Center to my grandfather is a fitting tribute. He played an instrumental role in the creation of this national park. In the early 1950s, my grandfather became concerned that Cape Cod would be consumed by commercialization and that the pristine, majestic coastline that features so prominently throughout American history would be spoiled, and only the wealthy would be able to enjoy what remained beautiful of Cape Cod. Today, the protected seashore offers the same natural splendor as it has for generations and is shared by millions of visitors every year. According to our family history, my grandfather was inspired by his close friend and Washington roommate, Congressman Eddie Boland, who had visited the Outer Banks in North Carolina and learned of efforts to preserve land there. When they filed legislation to establish the Cape Cod National Seashore in 1958, it was not received well by residents. We all heard tales growing up of how my grandfather and Congressman Boland were booed out of a town meeting and how some incensed Lower Cape residents even hung them in effigy. But after 5 years, and with a lot of hard work by many serving in elected or appointed office at the time, final legislation was enacted in 1961. Within a decade, the Cape Cod National Seashore was recognized as a universal success, with locals and tourists alike enjoying the benefits of the new national park. Just as my grandfather's early years in public life centered on North Cambridge, Friends from Barry's Corner, Boston College, representing the people of the 8th Congressional District in Massachusetts, and serving in this great institution, Cape Cod served as a retreat for my grandparents away from the demands of Washington. For the 8 of us grandchildren, Cape Cod is synonymous with our grandparents. It is where Tip O'Neill became Pop-Pop, the moniker we chose for our grandfather, and where some of our most special childhood memories were made during summers and holidays. We remember he would turn to us, cigar in hand, and start singing one of his favorite songs. If you're fond of sand dunes and salty air, quaint little villages here and there, you're sure to fall in love with Old Cape Cod. Those lyrics are from Patti Page's 1957 classic, Old Cape Cod, a hit song from when the National Seashore was starting to gain traction, and just 1 year before he filed legislation to protect the land. Nearly 10 years after, on Memorial Day weekend in 1966, the stretch of beach that inspired Thoreau, Beston, Kerouac, Eugene O'Neill, and many others was dedicated as the Cape Cod National Seashore. My grandfather took part that day in the dedication ceremony at the newly constructed Visitor Center overlooking Salt Pond and Nauset Bay. From that point on, my grandfather and his lifelong friend, Leo Deal, who vacationed nearby, acted as the unofficial tourist board, taking all house guests and visitors, official and otherwise, to tour the National Seashore and experience for themselves the great natural wonder of Cape Cod. My grandfather loved it there. He would walk for hours on the beach and especially enjoyed watching the coastline during storms and hurricanes. Despite the early controversy and opposition, today the area my grandfather feared would become too quote-unquote honky-tonk is instead a national treasure, home to miles of unspoiled beach, sand dunes, historical structures, and wildlife habitat. The Cape Cod National Seashore is one of America's 10 most visited national parks, sought after by millions of visitors annually from Massachusetts, from around the United States, and from around the world. As Henry Beston wrote in his 1928 renowned work, The Outermost House, my grandfather's favorite book, this, quote, last fragment of an ancient and vanished land, worn by the breakers and the rains, and disintegrated by the wind, still stands bold, end quote. This is exactly what my grandfather envisioned over 50 years ago, and there is no greater legacy he has left. Cape Cod remains a special place for friends and family to gather year after year, just as our family did and will continue to do, and will be so for generations to come. We are all very proud of his vision and honored by the action proposed in this resolution. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. O'Neill, for your testimony. At this point, we will begin with questions for the witnesses to allow all of our members to participate and to ensure that we can hear from all of our witnesses today. Members are limited to 5 minutes for their questions. If members have additional questions, however, we can add another round of questioning. I now will recognize the ranking member for any questions that he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's no objection, I'd like to submit my opening statement for the record, and also at this point yield my time to the gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Tsongas, for any statements you might have. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Grijalva. I appreciate the opportunity to speak out today in strong support of H.R. 4400, a bill to designate the Salt Pond Visitor Center at the Cape Cod National Seashore as the Thomas P. O'Neill Jr. Salt Pond Visitor Center. I applaud Mr. Markey for introducing this legislation and thank the members of Speaker O'Neill's family, some of whom are here today, who I've known for so many years, for their support of this legislation, as well as for their friendship throughout the many years that we have all served together. Tip O'Neill had such a long and distinguished career in public service, beginning as a state representative in the Massachusetts House of Representatives and rising to become the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, serving there for 10 illustrious years. Tip was not only a powerful force as Speaker, I remember so well the day he was sworn in, but also a friend and mentor to me and to my late husband, Paul, when he was serving also as a member of the House under Speaker O'Neill and under Majority Leader O'Neill. Tip and his family spent many summers on the Cape over the years, so much so that the story, as we're hearing today, of the O'Neill family and the story of Cape Cod are all but intertwined. Tip realized the value, as Lee has testified to so well, in preserving and protecting the national treasure so that his children and grandchildren and all residents of the Commonwealth, as well as this country, can enjoy the pristine beaches of the Cape for many summers to come. Working with President Kennedy, Speaker O'Neill was a visionary and instrumental in establishing the Cape Cod National Seashore in 1961. The Cape Cod National Seashore encompasses over 40,000 acres and nearly 40 miles of seashore, stretching from Provincetown in the north to Chatham on the southeastern end of the Cape, encompassing some beautiful places and very different and distinct places as well. Because of Speaker O'Neill's great vision, thousands of families can enjoy 6 beaches, many miles of walking and bicycling trails, and countless interpretive programs offered by the knowledgeable National Park Service. Whatever part of this state any one of us represents, the National Seashore and the Cape Cod are a treasure to us all. My family and I fondly remember spending many warm summers on not a national seashore beach, but one nearby, where we saw Lee in a very much younger state, as well as her cousins and siblings over the course of many summers. And we are proud to support the great legacy of Speaker O'Neill by naming the Salt Pond Visitor Center in his honor. So I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I believe we don't have any questions or statements that we would like to submit to the
may I ask?
panel, but I would like to move on to Representative Markey.
Thank you
for
so much.
questions.
We did a little research, and Lee, on June 21st, 1960, your grandfather sat in that seat, in this room. And here's what he said. He said, Madam Chairman, I regret I am late. I came down on the plane this morning from Boston, and it was about an hour late. As you know, I am one of the original sponsors of this legislation, having filed it along with Congressman Boland. I live actually probably 70 miles from Cape Cod, but a good many of the people in my area summer regularly down there, and I believe it's one of the finest spots in the entire world. One of the reasons I filed this bill some years ago, I saw the lower part of the Cape, that is the part of the Cape nearer to Boston, becoming what I thought was honky-tonk. And I believe that the beautiful beaches God had given to our section of the country should be protected, and that the protection would either have to come from the state or from the federal government. So it's on those bases that I am in favor of this bill. I think the great majority of people on the Cape are in favor of the bill, and I know that the great majority of the people in New England are in favor of that bill. And so we'll give you a copy of the testimony of your grandfather on June 21st, 1960, same room, same place, same seat, to the same committee, making the appeal for the creation of this wonderful part of the world. And what you have presented today in testimony is absolutely beautiful. And I just wonder if you wanted to add a few more words about your own memories of your grandfather and Cape Cod and what it meant to him and to you.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. I actually submitted a longer form of this statement for the record, and I don't want to take too much of the committee's time. I will say, though, we have great memories of him riding around in his blue station wagon, picking us up after the golf game, and everything I communicated on behalf of my cousins and my family is very true. It's our collective memory, and I encourage you, if you're interested, to all read it. Thank you.
Well, we thank you. And if there is such a thing as Irish aristocracy, many believe it's an oxymoron. The O'Neills are our Irish aristocracy, and it means the world to us that you're, giving consideration to this bill, which is something that will commemorate the life of one of the great Americans of the 20th century. And we thank you for the consideration for the legislation, and we thank you, Lee, and your whole family for being here today.